Hey everybody, Dave here. Today I'm going to automate RPAchallenge.com in OpenBots Studio. OpenBots is an open source RPA tool that you can download for free and use. So I highly suggest you download it and try it out, see what it's like. There's really no harm in trying it. So let's try to automate RPAchallenge.com in OpenBots Studio. Before I start development, let me tell you about the website. RPAchallenge.com is a website where each time the page loads, the fields change location. And that's something that we can kind of test ourselves as developers, as well as test RPA tools to see if we're capable of automating a website even when the fields change location from time to time. So I have already downloaded an Excel spreadsheet for sample input to this website. If you were to click this download Excel button, you'd get an Excel spreadsheet with 10 rows of data in it. And I'll show you where I put the one that I downloaded. I put it at C:\test, and then inside that is the file called challenge.xlsx. Now let's look inside that file, and I want to show you what's here. There's 7 fields, and each of these 7 fields you'll see relates to a field on the web page, and there's 10 rows of data here. Now, I have made some changes to this input file. If you just go download it, I think you'll find that the last name field has an extra space in the name. I deleted that. I also went to the H column and right-clicked on it and did delete, because there used to be data in that column, I think, and so it gets pulled in whenever you read the data. And then the other thing I did is I actually manually deleted all of the rows that are below this data set. And I think, again, that's because there used to be data here, and for whatever reason, when you just delete it by selecting like this and hitting delete, that doesn't actually change it so that it knows there's no data there. It's more like empty value instead of being null, that kind of thing. So when you read it in, it would end up reading like 1,000 rows. So I manually deleted these by selecting them all and then right-clicking and hitting delete like this. It's definitely possible to fix that problem in an automated fashion inside the tool, but I just feel like that's outside the scope of what we're trying to do here. The way this will work is we will read in all the data from that Excel spreadsheet, and then we're going to click start on the web page. And by we, I mean the automation is actually going to click start, and then it's going to enter row by row all the data into these fields. After each row, it'll click submit, and then it will click submit 10 times because there's 10 rows of data. And then eventually when it gets to the last one, it will say our success rate because it's actually reading the data that we've put into the fields and verifying that we entered it correctly. And at the end, hopefully we will get 100% success rate. So let's jump into it and automate RPAchallenge.com with OpenBots Studio. This is the first screen that comes up when you open OpenBots Studio. We either need to enter a new name for a project, or we can open up a project we've worked on recently. But I'm going to create an entirely new one and make this whole thing from scratch. So I'm going to name this RPA Challenge. I'm going to leave the project type as OpenBots, but you can see there's some other options here as well. And then I'm going to leave the project location by default. Whenever you create a new project, it's going to put in the obligatory hello world message box for us. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that. Now, the first thing that I'm going to do is get data out of Excel. So I'm going to go over to the commands pane right here, and I'm going to go down to Excel commands. The name of the command that this tool wants us to use to start using Excel is always going to be create Excel application. And that's effectively creating an instance of Excel that we can then open workbooks in and whatever else. So let's go ahead and drag that and drop it over here. I'm going to open it up. It's going to ask me sort of to answer a few questions. It's always going to name the Excel instance by default as default Excel. And that's literally the name that you're going to reference a specific instance of Excel if you had more than one open at once. I'm going to go down and choose whether I want to open a new workbook or if I want to open an existing workbook. So I'm going to click Open Workbook to open an existing one. And then I'm going to click this button for Select a File. I'll navigate to where my file is and choose right here for challenge.xlsx. Do I want this to be visible? Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and choose for Excel to open visibly on the screen. And then do I want to close all existing Excel instances before I work with this? I'm going to say yes, just to make sure things go well. Private is referring not to the scope of a data item, just to point out, private is actually referring to, is this data sensitive? So I'm going to leave this unchecked because it's not sensitive data and click OK. Next thing we want to do is get data out of the spreadsheet that we just pointed to. So I'm going to go down to Get Range, drag that on here, and open that up. Here, it's going to look for a range for us, right? So I could hard code something like, if you've ever worked with Excel before, you know you can type something like A1 to G11. And I think that would actually be the full range of the data that we have. So this is A1 to G11. and it would select the data and we'd be good to go. But I just don't feel good about that. What if there were 12 rows? What if there were 100 rows? You just don't know. So when you build a process, though you may not make everything the most robust way that it can be, at least getting data out of Excel, I feel like we have the responsibility to make it so that it can handle any number of rows. So that's what I want to try making it do. So let's close this out. And what I'm going to try to do instead is replace this 11 with a variable that we can determine at runtime. And we'll come back to that in just a second. So do I want the headers? Yes, I want the headers. Do I want to read the formulas? No. What do I want to output this data table to? Because when it reads in a set of columns and rows from Excel, it's going to go into a variable called a data table, which if you're familiar with Blue Prism, it might be called collection, or you might consider it a two-dimensional array. I think I've given enough examples. Okay, so I'm going to hit Control K. I don't know why, but my mind tells me that's what I'm supposed to do. And I feel like every time I'm supposed to remember having learned that, but my mind just tells me that's what I'm supposed to do. So I'm going to click Add. I'm going to name this V Data. I'm putting a V at the beginning of it because the tool suggests that I do that. I don't really think there's any functional reason for it. And then I'm going to go down and choose the data type, data table. And I'm not going to put in a default value. I'm going to click OK. Click OK one more time. And now this is where it's going to put our output data table to. Notice it's got curly braces around it. Anytime you reference a variable in this program, you gotta put curly braces around it. And then this is not sensitive data. Click OK. Now before we move forward, like I said, I want to change this 11 to be dynamic, to come from a variable. So I'm going to grab this command called get last row index. What this will hopefully tell us is what's the last row that has data in it in the spreadsheet. It'll return that number to me. So it might be 10 or 11 or something like that. And then I will use that as an input to get range so that we can only get the number of rows that are actually there. And if there are more rows, then we'll get those extra rows as well. So let's open up that command, and it's going to ask me which column do I want to check. I don't suppose it really matters here. All of the columns A through G are going to have data in them, so I'm just going to leave it as A because that's the one it's going to look at all the cells in that column all the way down until it finds the first one that is empty and then give us the index number of the one right before that. So let's output to a number. So it says it's going to be type int32. So I'm going to hit Control K, hit add, and I'm going to type v index. Change this to int32 for the data type and click OK. Click OK one more time. Whenever it determines the index of the last row, it's going to put it in a v index. And this is not private. I'm going to click OK. And now we can go back into get range. And now that at this point, we will already have the last row index. So we can replace this 11 with curly braces, v index, end curly braces. And I could have actually clicked this and chosen it right here as well. But instead I just typed it. All right. And then that's all we need to change there. The last thing we need to do is close the Excel application. So let's drag this over, open it up. The only thing I want to change here, since it's already pointing to the right Excel instance name, is to change the save workbook setting to no, because I'm not making any changes and I see no purpose in saving the workbook just because. So let's save this and let me put a breakpoint right here. Let's debug this. And what it'll do is run these first 3 lines and it stops on the 4th one without running it, so it's not closed. And in the middle of debug mode, I just wanted to show you that you can go in and actually see the data that is inside of a data table in the middle of the run, which I think is pretty useful, right? So it's kind of comma delimiting the fields and whatnot, but like it's still readable. And I'm going to go here and just show you, this is going to be at the bottom right of my screen whenever we're in debug mode. I know you can't see it, but that's because I'm only capturing a part of my screen. And so I just want to point out that you've got step over, step into, resume, and I'm going to hit resume to finish this. And this is what it looks like when it finishes running. So I'll hit close, and now we're back into edit mode again. Let me remove this breakpoint. I'm going to hit Control S to save. And now we can move into working with the website. OpenBots has an interesting way of helping you spy a website. I don't actually even have to open Chrome in order to do the spying. So while I do have the website open right now, right here, I'm not actually going to use this to spy anything. So the way this is going to work, I'm going to click Recorder Tools and choose Web Element Recorder. That's going to open up another screen where I'm going to go navigate to http://rpachallenge.com. Once the website loads, then what I can do is start spying this. Now let me point out, this is kind of interesting. This is like emulating, or it's its own embedded browser. I just say this feels pretty nice to have the browser inside of the tool. Now when it actually runs at runtime, it's gonna open up Chrome or Internet Explorer or Firefox based upon what we choose. But at least when we go spy the various elements and stuff, it's inside of here. So I'm going to go ahead and click record. What it does is asks me to choose an engine type. So I want to choose whether I'm using Chrome, Firefox, etc. And I'm going to leave Chrome selected. And then the other thing I think is interesting, it's asking me to choose what the default search parameters will be. So what are the default attributes that I want to be selected when I create elements? So I'm going to uncheck XPath because I think for most of these elements, we're not going to use XPath. So I'm going to choose tag name. And then I'm going to end up selecting one of the results for CSS selector. And I'll show you what I mean when I get to that, but I'm going to leave it unchecked for now. I'm going to click OK. You can see it says recording. And what I can do is go down and click into the first name input field, and you'll see an XPath pop up at the top right here that shows that really long XPath for it. And what I can do now is click save. And I'm going to type first name. And you'll see now that right here, I told it the default parameters or the default attributes that I wanted selected. And so it selected tag name automatically for me. The other thing that I want to do, as I mentioned, is I want to use the CSS selector, but a specific one, not all of them. And in this case, it's going to be CSS selector 2. I should point out that using this is when I discovered that this CSS selector, you can literally copy this and go to Blue Prism and paste that into the attribute called CSS selector there, and it works. I had no idea that was a thing. I think it was added in Blue Prism 6.9, so it's relatively recent, but that was pretty amazing to see that, and it was because of this tool that I learned you could do that in Blue Prism. So I had never expected to learn more about Blue Prism by not using Blue Prism. So let me point out the reason that I'm choosing this. Obviously, we don't want to use this XPath, or at least we don't want to use an absolute XPath like this, because this is very dependent upon the page, the structure of the page being exactly the same every time. And like we looked at earlier, when you reload the page, when you click submit, the page changes, fields change locations, so you can't rely on the exact location of an element anymore. You kind of have to find it using different selectors and stuff. So in this case, we're using a tag name of input because all of these fields have a tag name of input. In fact, all 7 of these fields, and plus this button, all have a tag name of input. Then they also, which actually now that I look at it, we probably don't need this tag name. We could probably use this CSS selector by itself, but I'll leave it like it is for now. What we're saying here is that this is an input field, and there is an attribute inside of it called ng_reflect_name, which I don't know what that means, but here we are. And that has a value of label first name. What that tells me is that this text field has an attribute in it that holds a value that points to what it belongs to. So this belongs to first name. And I'll show you after I click OK and I spy the next one, which is going to be last name, that this text field will actually have an attribute in it that indicates it has to do with last name, even though I'm not doing anything with this label. So I'm going to hit save. And then the CSS selector 2 right here, this says it basically refers to label last name or has to do with label last name. And so that's perfect. That means that I can use this then whenever I want to enter the last name into the web page, that I can say, oh, go find a thing that is an input and it has a reflect name of label last name. When I want to enter the email, I say, go find an element that has a tag of input and it has a reflect name of label email. And that's the way it's able to find it dynamically on the page wherever it is. So this is going to be last name. And then we want phone number. Save. Phone number. I'm going to check this second CSS selector. Again, I don't think we really need this tag name up there, but it doesn't hurt. Then we want email. Save. Email. Choose the CSS selector. And you can see each time I'm going through this that it actually says, email and phone number and whatever else. And then let's go to address, save. This one says label address. The next one is going to be company name, save, company name, and then roll in company. Choose the CSS selector, and it's got, you see this one's a little bit different. It's not label roll in company, so it may not be exactly the same thing, but it's pretty close and kind of obvious to tell what that's referring to. I'm going to click OK, and then I'm going to spy a couple more things. Let's choose the submit button, save. We'll call this submit, and we're going to do the CSS selector. Oh, this one's not the same. So here's one that's a little different. It's not that different. Instead of using that ng reflect attribute or whatever, instead we're going to use this CSS selector for, which happens to be that this is a tag of input, and then it has an attribute called value, and that value has a value called submit. Is that confusing? Whatever. Okay, so we're going to click OK on this one, and then let's do the start button. Save. Now this one's interesting. Now, of course, I've already looked up how to do this, and so don't feel like Dave just thought of this out of his own head. Like I had to read for a little while to understand how this works and how to choose the right thing to do. So let's call this start. Let me point out that none of the CSS selectors are helpful, right? This ng content C1 doesn't have a value. Class, waves, effect, call, S12, M12, large UI color button. That just doesn't look useful to me. And then button ID, there's no ID here. So we can't really use any of these. Same thing with class name. The only thing we've got is tag name, at least by default. And then of course we've got the XPath. We could technically use that. And it's possible that this would be in the same place every time. But what if it's not? So here's what we can do. We can delete this, and we can do something very similar to the CSS selector. And let's type // which tells us to look for anything. This is an XPath expression. Tells us to look for anywhere in the document object model for a button. Then I'm going to use square brackets. Inside that, I'm going to type text with open close parentheses. I guess that's kind of like a function. I don't know. Equals, and then 2 single quotes. Inside of those single quotes, I'm going to type start. Okay, so it's very similar to the CSS selector thing. Then let's click OK. And we'll find out if it works. If it doesn't, I'll have to do some Googling. I think that we have everything we need. I'm not sure. Let me go up to Element Manager and look. First name, last name, phone number, email, address, company name, rolling company, start, submit. I think that's all we need. Let's click OK, and let's exit out of this. We have to open a browser. Let's go down to the web browser commands and drag over create browser. In here, this is going to auto name the browser instance, default browser. We're using Chrome. We want to go to http://rpachallenge.com. Instance tracking. This is like if you had 2 scripts, you were going to run one after the other, and you want both of them to use the same instance of the browser, then you could do keep instance alive and then use the same name in both of them. But in this case, this is just one script. I'm going to leave it as forget instance. Window state, I want to be normal. I don't want it to actually maximize, but mainly because I'm just recording this on a part of my screen. And then there are Selenium command line options. I assume what you could do is things like incognito or force render accessibility and some of those command line arguments. At least I assume that's what this is for. And then there's no sensitive data here, of course, so I'm going to click OK. right after we open the browser, we want to click on the start buttons. Let's drag over element action. And this is going to use default browser. Let's insert an element from the element manager. Let's choose start. And you can see these things that I put in there originally are now set into here from element manager. For element search option, I'm going to leave it as find element. I would use this if I needed to pull back multiple elements. And then element action is going to be invoke click. I want the timeout to be 15 seconds because typically the website loads with that amount of time. If it can't find the start button within 15 seconds, then something else has gone wrong. And then I'm not going to change anything else. Let's click OK. Now I want to loop through each of the rows in Excel. So let's find a loop section. We need something like, oh, here we go. Loop collection. Let's delete what's inside. So loop collection looks like, let's see, it should say somewhere what this works for. Right, yeah, so it works for data tables, lists, dictionaries, etc. Okay, so I'm going to choose data. I'm going to output this. I'm going to hit Control K to create a new, let's output to row. And I just want to point out what it means by output is that choose data row, click OK one more time. I wanted to show you that what it means by output whenever it's referring to a loop is not what is an output after the loop is all done. It's saying when you go into a loop and you give me a data table, here is what I'm going to output for you while you're inside that loop and that you're going to deal with. So in our case, it's a data table with a bunch of rows. And when you go into the loop, it kind of breaks that down into row by row. And that row is your output that you use while you're in the loop. Let's click OK. Next, I want to go back down here and use another element action. Let's drag it and drop it in here. What I think that I can do at this point is create a single element action line or command here, put in a few details, and then I should be able to copy and paste that the rest of the way for the other fields. So let's open up this one and use it for first name. I'm going to insert the first name element and then not change that. I'm going to change the element action to set text. I want to use curly braces to refer to the row, v row, and then I'm going to use dot operation. So v row dot, the name of the field that I want to use, which is going to be first name. Make sure it's curly braces around this and not square brackets. Clear element before setting text. Let's go ahead and choose yes here. Okay, so you see I changed several things that I don't really feel like changing every single time. So I'm going to click OK, copy this, and paste it 6 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now I can just go into each of these, change the element to, say, last name. Then down here, I do have to change this to last name. And that's it for that row. Let's change this to phone number. And then let's change this to point to the phone number field. We'll change the element to email. Where's email? There's email. And then we'll change the text to set to point to the email field. Change this one to point to, what comes after email? Address. And then the field to point to address. So effectively what we're doing is getting data out of the proper field. You know what I should have done? And this would have been another thing I wouldn't have to change in each one, is I could have changed this timeout in seconds. I don't want it to be a 30-second timeout, so I'm going to change this to 5 seconds. If it fails, I don't really want to be waiting for 30 seconds. 5, 5, 5, and then let's go back down here. Did I finish this one? Yeah, so this is address. Then we want to do company name. Let's change the field name from Excel to be company name. change the timeout because I forgot to do that. And then the last one is going to be role in company. Role in company. Change the timeout to 5 seconds. Click OK. The last thing we need to do is click the start, or no, not the start button. We want to click the submit button. Insert, submit, right? So we've got our CSS selector down here in the tag name, which we don't need, but it's there anyways. Whoops. Find element. We want to invoke a click, and we want the timeout to be 5 seconds. That's the max timeout, right? Click OK. Now the question is, do we need a wait after this? I'm going to say we probably don't need a wait in this case because this website responds pretty quickly, but I could see a potential wait being required at the end of this, but we're going to try it without that. At this point, I think the only thing left is to close the web browser. I'm going to drag this, drop it to the end, and I'm not going to change anything here, actually. Now let me save this. One thing I want to do is add a breakpoint on close browser because after it runs, I want to actually see what it did. So here we go. All right, so this is going to open a new browser window. Here we go. All right, so you can see it says Chrome is being controlled by automated test software. I guess that's something that Selenium does. Okay, so it's clicked the start button already. We're on round 1. Now we're on round 2 already. It looks like it's putting the data in the right fields. It's going a little too fast for me to tell for all of them, but it does look like it's going correctly. One thing that this is doing differently is that I used a set text command instead of something that would literally like click in and type with keys, which would take a lot longer. So there might have been another command to do that with, but I just chose to use set text. And so it's going a lot faster than it might have with some of the other tools that I've done this same automation with. I chose to use send keys in those tools. And so those end up taking, 2 or 3 times as long just because of the type of input that I chose to use. So we got a success rate of 100%. And I have to say that was pretty easy. We did have to get a little bit technical, that we did have to use an XPath expression for the start button. But I do think the start button would work without that. It's just, I don't feel good about using an absolute XPath for anything if I can help it. I mean, it's a free tool, right? So you could say, man, for a free tool, this is pretty good. But honestly, like even for a paid tool, I still think this is a great product. There's definitely some functionality I'd like to see added. But as far as I'm concerned, it's better than Power Automate Desktop is right now. I have more functionality in this tool that I've seen so far than Power Automate Desktop. But granted, I think they have different goals in mind, and Power Automate Desktop is going for ease of use probably, and this tool is going for functionality. I mean, granted, it's fairly easy to use too, but I don't know that that's so much its focus. It's more like, let's do this in the simplest way possible. Let's make these different commands available, and let's make it work well and be performant. I think they've succeeded. So this is a great product. Kudos to OpenBots. I really like it. I hope to see more updates in the future, and I will probably continue to use this tool. I encourage you to download OpenBots, give it a try. Let me know how it goes. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you in the next video.